I, from very early, lived a secret life, an inward life, became extremely secretive, and began to think that I was, so to speak, born into occupied territory, because the catastrophes in our family were so great, and there were so many things that I couldn't reveal, that I seemed to go about in disguise.
The family catastrophes le Carré tried to conceal were that his father had been convicted of fraud and that his mother deserted the family when he was only 5. It was his grandparents who paid for his education here at St Andrew's Prep School, Pangbourne.
Most writers, I think, hear their stories. Some see them too. But I think most of us, in our mind's ear, wish our stories to be read aloud. And certainly when I'm writing, I want to hear them. And I even want to imagine who I'm talking to. For me to read aloud to you is a very happy, natural process. So this is a bit from Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, and it describes how a new master arrives at a prep school, which is not completely unlike this school. So he's looking at him. The little boy's watching him as he arrives. "What are you good at, Bill?" "I don't know, sir," said Roach woodenly. "You've got to be good at something, surely. Everyone is. How about football? You good at football, Bill?" "No, sir." "You a SWAT, then?" Jim asked carelessly, as he lowered himself with a short grunt onto the bed and took a pull from the beaker. "You don't look a SWAT, I must say," he added politely, "although you're a loner."
After studying modern languages at university, John le Carré became a schoolteacher and accepted a job at Eton College. In the late 1950s, he joined the diplomatic service, serving in Hamburg and Bonn.
I wasn't Mata Hari, and I wasn't Himmler's aunt. But it would be stupid of me to pretend that I was not, like Somerset Maugham, Graham Greene, and lots of other writers, for a time engaged in that work. It would be terribly disappointing for the livelier fantasies of people who have written about me in that capacity if they knew how boring my life had been, and how humdrum is the world of intelligence in many ways. I've always tried to deny it and keep away from the subject, and I intend to go on doing so.
John le Carré is not the writer's real name, as almost everybody knows. His real name is David Cornwell. But the idea of having something real and not real is at the heart of what he does, and it's useful to start out with a false name. He denied that he was a lot of things he later said he was, including being a spy. It's interesting that we're talking about his concealment now at the very time that he's produced a book about his life, which seems the fullest book about his life, about his father being imprisoned as a con man, about his mother leaving at 5 years old, about the things he did, although, as in everything with le Carré, you think, well, yes, but is that true?
You've always made a lot of play, and in different ways, between fiction and secret work.
Yes,
work.
yes.
You obviously see all sorts of reflections.
Yes, watchfulness, a little bit of larceny. I think it was L.P. Hartley who said, "Don't leave me alone in your study, for I'm certain to read your letters." Well, I wouldn't go that far, but there is a part of one's mind, a part of any writer's mind, I'm sure, which doesn't sleep, which watches and records. And that is part of the same mentality that goes with the intelligence world. Graham Greene refers to it, I think, as the chip of ice in every writer's heart.
It was while he was in the diplomatic service in the early 60s that le Carré started writing. His first 2 novels, Call for the Dead and A Murder of Quality, introduced the character of the aging British agent George Smiley, and they were moderately successful. But it was his 3rd novel, The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, that really made his name and enabled him to leave the Foreign Office and take up writing full-time. The book sold in millions, and it was made into a major feature film starring Richard Burton and Claire Bloom. How far did the spy who came in from the cold change his life?
Completely. I mean, he went from being an ordinary, fairly ordinary person, a junior MI6 officer serving in Bonn, who, undercover he was serving, he was posing as an ordinary diplomat, and he suddenly became a worldwide celebrity. I mean, I personify this in a way in the book, because he, in the incident of when he went to America, he suddenly received a telegram from his American publisher saying, "Come over now." And he managed to get on a flight to America. And he had no real impression of how famous he was. Then there was an announcement saying, "Will Mr. Lee Carr, please make himself known to the stewardess?" And he didn't really realize who was being talked about. But he made himself known. And then he was taken off the plane straight to down the escalator to a limousine and straight to a press conference. And he suddenly realized that he was famous. It was like Byron, you know, I woke up one morning and I was famous. And everything suddenly came at him at once. Money, glamour, and indeed women. I mean, he said he was propositioned those first few weeks in New York, and he was propositioned at least half a dozen times.
I wrote it with passion, which I don't think was true quite of the first two books. It was, for me, it was triggered by a great deal of personal strain, and by my first experience of conflict on the ground. It was actually being there almost at the time when the wall went up. Feeling the strains, the political strains that were running at that time, reading the telegrams, believing, as I did, as anybody might have done, who had seen the contingency planning, that we were very near world war. It was a very bitter book. And, of course, we'd had Ian Fleming. I mean, the world had been aware from its newspapers of this great grey army of cold warriors, of defectors, of spies, frontier crossers. And what had literature produced? This candy floss image of a Mako man, an Etonian, I think, isn't he? Who really seemed not to have a moral doubt in his head. This is a passage from The Spy Who Came In From the Cold. If you saw the movie, you will have seen the main part of Alec Leamas, played by Richard Burton. "This is a war," Leamas replied. "It's graphic and unpleasant because it's fought on a tiny scale at close range, fought with a wastage of innocent life, sometimes, I admit. But it's nothing, nothing at all beside other wars, the last or the next." "Oh, God," said Liz softly, "you don't understand. You don't want to. You're trying to persuade yourself. It's far more terrible what they're doing. To find the humanity in people, in me and whoever else they use, to turn it like a weapon in their hands, and use it to hurt and kill."
The character of George Smiley became a household name after the publication of le Carré's best-selling Smiley trilogy, Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, The Honourable Schoolboy and Smiley's People. Its success was due in part to Alec Guinness's unforgettable portrayal of Smiley in 2 television adaptations.
George, you won.
Did I?
Yes. Yes, I suppose I did.
We had so much luck that it was incredible, just at the most external level. We got Alec Guinness, and I think it was the first time he'd ever done television. So
We also had spies in the papers every 10 seconds.
We had spies in the papers every 10 seconds. We had the Blunt affair.
That's right.
So it was an incredible fluke.
You genius. You angel.
Smiley thought of Haydn and his own life's work ruined. He recited in his despair a whole list of crimes, the tortures, the killings, the endless ring of corruption, to lay upon the frail shoulders of this one man. But they would not stay there. He did not want these spoils won by these methods. Guinness can act with his elbows, with his toes, with his ears, so that there is such a central alertness to him that you can't take your eyes off him. He also took the character away from me. I found that writing Smiley, after Smiley, through Guinness, had, so to speak, entered the public domain, was very difficult. And I was beginning, in my mind, to caricature myself and him. The bright lights that were shone on Smiley made him unattractive to me, and I defected from him.
So in the sense that the success blew it?
The success blew the operation, in a way, for me, and so I closed the series down, made it a trilogy, and tucked Smiley up in bed. And one day when he's maybe a little forgotten again, I'll get him out, but for the time being, we are not on terms.
John le Carré was to return to the character of Smiley 7 years later with his book The Secret Pilgrim, in which Smiley reflects on his long life in the espionage business. In 1983, John le Carré published his novel The Little Drummer Girl, which was seen as a radical departure from his previous work, set as it was in the Middle East and centering around the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Charlie is, in my book, about 28. She's a person of extremely strong conscience. She wishes for a moral anchor. She wishes for a discipline, if you will. Although she's rejecting, she really wants to join. A feeling that I know about. Charlie, when she's first picked up by the Israelis, is loosely, radically pro-Palestinian. They don't discount that in the least. They like that part of her. But they take hold of her, and they control her, and they recruit her, and they turn her into a double agent. In that sense, it's an exploration of the double agent, which I began in Tinker Tailor.
Many of le Carré's fictional characters are based on real people. He got the idea for Charlie when he saw his half-sister, the actress Charlotte Cornwell, on stage in rather unusual circumstances.
My sister was traveling with the RSC, and she was performing at Camborne in the sports center there. And it was pouring with rain, the most unbelievable noise on the roof. Charlotte was really having to belt it out. And I thought she was very good, but she was over the top. I mean, she was booming in order to defeat the rain.
A villain that have slandered, scorned, dishonored my kinswoman.
It was actually the moment where I thought, yes, I'll have Charlotte for my character, at least as the raw material.
Uncovered slander, unmitigated rancor. Oh, God, that I were a man, I would eat his heart in the marketplace. And then Benedict says, "Hear me, Beatrice!" At which point, rain finally defeated us.
Your brother says that you were the model for Charlie. Do you see yourself in that character, or are there some essential differences?
I think politically, there are great similarities. When I was younger, I was lured towards several extreme left-wing groups of people. I was desperate to find a place where I felt my beliefs and my ideals, I could hang them on a hook somewhere. I was once told by Terry Hands, director of the RSC, that he said, had I lived in Germany during my early 20s, that I would have been perfect Baader-Meinhof fodder. And I, at the time, I mean, goodness, that's not fair, but I see exactly what he means, of sort of rich kids, comfortable kids with just kicking against everything, not really knowing what.
Thank God, she thought, a homeland at last. You will play yourself, but more so, they had said. And when had she ever not? Yourself, with all your bluffs called, they said. Put it that way. Put it any way you like, she thought. Yes, I'm listening. Yes, I follow.
In the end, the fulcrum of the whole thing is an idea of a commitment to a particular personal love affair.
Yes, it is.
Because from my reading of the book, when Charlie, recruited by Israeli intelligence, falls in love with this man, Joseph,
yes,
goes to do her job behind the Palestinian lines, she has, naturally, perceptions about Palestine which you've been describing yourself, and then is totally torn, and her loyalty is given in the end to this particular man, Joseph, was
Whose own loyalties, of course, are ambiguous.
yeah.
As a fighting Israeli who has given the whole of his youth to the various wars, he feels now that the things he fought for are not there.
I first met him in the 1970s when I wanted to do an interview with him for a program I was doing on the BBC, full-length interviews, long-length interviews with Mailer and Bellow and Tennessee Williams and various people. And this man, John le Carré, whose work I admired and who had never, as far as I knew, been interviewed at any length whatsoever. The arrangements for it were very distinctive. I've never come across anything like that. It wasn't worrying, but it was odd. He would meet me in a flat off the Bayswater Road at a certain time. This is all true. Me and the crew and myself. And there was a place where we could collect a key for this flat. So we collected a key for the flat. We went into a perfectly ordinary block of flats and opened the door to a completely empty flat. We set up cameras, lights, also, waiting. And then at a certain time, the great man entered. And he gave a tremendous interview. Uninterrupted, he was pleased with it. Next morning, or 3 mornings later, I opened the door, went into the street of a little side street I lived in Hampstead. And who was coming up the street? But John le Carré. He lived just 9 doors down. He knew I lived there. I didn't know he'd just moved in there. We could have done the blooming thing at the end of the road, but he wanted all this subterfuge and all this trailing up and down. We became close neighbours and quite good friends for a while until he moved. Well, good friends. He liked to pop in late at night to chew the fat. About 11 o'clock, heave up and have a drink, and he talks very well. He's a wonderful mimic. He's got a very good memory for stories. He knows a lot. He's very well educated in many areas of life, and he was very good company indeed.
By the end of the novel, Charlie, in her role as double agent, feels that she has betrayed not only the Israeli, Joseph, but also the Palestinians.
By betraying literally the Palestinians, as it were,
Yes.
she gets a lot of people who we come to like very much killed.
Yes.
And so she holds to that but destroys that. It's more like your earlier novels than the Smiley novels, where there's always Smiley,
Yes.
who's good man. I mean, there's a great deal of bleakness. I mean, there's a great deal of bleak.
Well, there's
But
no
it's very
consolation.
bleak. No.
Smiley isn't there to cheer us up and explain things and say, we'll carry on another time. When the curtain comes down, as Charlie is warned, in the theatre of the real, nobody gets up and goes home. The bodies stay where they are.
But there's also been the contrast between the extreme private morality that you have
Yes.
and the morality of the public
And
forum.
the institutional necessity.
Yeah.
She says, who do we kill when they're recruiting her? And the reply is only somebody who has entirely broken the human bond, who has lost our claim to compassion. Him we must kill, say the Israelis. And she says, but who are you to say that that's happened? And their answer is glossed over. And what was the first bond that was broken? Who cast the first stone? God alone knows. So that the institutional conflict cannot be resolved in the story. And personal love suffers and is adjusted accordingly.
One of the things that people perhaps don't generally realize is how long his career is. I mean, he's been at the top for half a century. I struggle to think of any other author who is having a #1 bestseller 50 years after his first #1 bestseller. I mean, not even Dickens had such a long career. He is an international novelist. Yeah. In Europe, his status has never been higher, and he's just been awarded the Goethe Medal, for example. When his publisher, Ullstein, had their centenary, the keynote speaker at their great festivity was not a German author, it was John le Carré. It helps that he speaks perfect German, but you know, that's really rather remarkable, don't you think?
Yeah. Yes, I do.
So
as a comedian tries to fight off ridicule, so perhaps a thriller writer tries to cauterize tension or reconcile dissonant components within himself by setting them out in different characters. And to entertain, to stimulate, to cause to ponder, to excite, to stretch, to have that sense of company that people feel with you. And in the end, it should be a story.